Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on pathways for institutionalizing evaluation at the national level as part of the second edition of the National Conference on Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning organized by the Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office at Niti Aayog. I am Urvashi Prasad, Director DMEO, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. Before we begin, some housekeeping points for today's session. We will start with a quick introduction of the speakers, followed by a panel discussion. Please make use of the Q&A box at the top for comments and questions. We look forward to your active participation during the session. With this, I will set some brief context for today's session. Evaluation as a credible means for generating evidence for public policy and program development has achieved universal acceptance. Evaluations in India have a long history spanning over 70 years. Traditionally deriving their legitimacy from the government planning function. The last 2 decades have seen concerted efforts by the government to integrate evaluations within the framework of outcome budgeting for the public sector. Institutionalizing evaluation will be a landmark initiative for supporting effective implementation of outcome budgets at the center and in states. While the demand for evaluations has increased, the practice standards and supply of credible evaluations remain fragmented. Institutionalization will be pivotal in articulating a framework for planning and using evaluation results in decision-making, streamlining it with multi-sectoral monitoring and appraisal mechanisms, and also professionalizing its practice. Today's panel brings together experts from both within and outside the government to understand the existing model of the evaluation system, deliberate on a roadmap for institutionalizing evaluations in India, discuss the challenges and opportunities in use of evaluations for planning, appraisal, and decision-making, and to provide recommendations for addressing sectoral evidence needs, outcome budgeting processes, and support outcome achievement for strengthening state evaluation capacities and use for achieving development targets. With that context, let me briefly introduce the panelists for today's session. We have with us on the panel Mr. Alok Misra, who is a civil servant with over 23 years of experience. He has recently joined as Additional Director General, Media and Communication, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Food and Public Distribution, Consumer Affairs, Heavy Industries and Textiles, Government of India. Prior to that, Mr. Misra was posted as Deputy Director General in the Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office at Niti Aayog, where he oversaw the evaluation studies of government schemes, external engagement with international organizations and academic institutions, besides capacity building, competency framework development, and national evaluation policy formulation. Thank you, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we have with us on the panel Professor Ian Goldman, who is an international advisor on evaluation and evidence systems and an adjunct professor at the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance, University of Cape Town. Professor Goldman has worked in the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, South Africa, where he established and ran the National Evaluation System. Thank you very much, Professor Goldman, for joining us. Next, we have on the panel Mr. Asela Kalugampitiye, a Sri Lankan lawyer who is currently the president of the Sri Lankan Evaluation Association and the Asia Pacific Evaluation Association. Asela ji has been working in the monitoring and evaluation field for over 2 decades. He was instrumental in launching the Global Parliamentarians Forum for Evaluation. We are grateful to Asela ji for joining us today on this panel. We also have with us Dr. Sanjay Kumar, who is a population dynamics and research specialist in the United Nations Population Fund India, and he is a core group member of the Evaluation Community of India. We look forward to your perspectives, Dr. Kumar. With that, we will begin the panel discussion. I would request the panelists to please limit your opening remarks to 10 minutes each so that we have adequate time for discussion and we can also take questions from the audience. My first question is for Mr. Alok Misra. Sir, I would request your views on the role of partnerships with private sector, civil society, academia in institutionalizing and strengthening evaluations in India. And also, if you could please share any thoughts on what could be done to incentivize partnerships within a government setup with a specific focus on states. Over to you, sir.
Right. Thanks, Urvashi, for inviting me. I think let me, look at this topic from three perspectives. First is the supply of evaluation. Second is demand for evaluation, and third part is, institutionalization, which we are going to talk about. And by that I mean setting up systems and processes. Fourth thing, probably, which I'll be talking later sometime, which would be aligning incentives to the bureaucrats' incentives, to the politicians' incentives. Now, as far as it goes for leveraging partnership, leveraging academic institutions, we need to realize, Urvashi, you would also sort of remember that we do realize that, there's the monitoring and evaluation ecosystem is underdeveloped in this country. And we know that international organizations have had long experience because they have been funding development programs all over the world. So they have long experience in sort of leveraging evaluations to find out the worth of what they were investing, in those countries, or what was working or what was not. So they have fairly good sense of expertise here. We did realize here that even academic institutions do not have sufficient optimum level of capacity out there. And why do I say that? Just about 2 years back, when DMEO went about, was tasked for, undertaking those 125, evaluations of 125, centrally sponsored schemes, we realized that the kind of capacity we wanted, that was not there either in academic institutions or anywhere. And that's why, perforce, we had to go to, consultancy firm, which could bring together all the required talent, at a very short sort of notice. Why do I say that, you require, enough capacity? Please understand that governments in democracy, work on a very short cycle. They have 5 years period. Once they launch a program, within few months, they would like to know that whether their interventions are working or not. They don't have this luxury of long-term kind of, 10 years or 15 years to see that whether things are working. And that's why the evaluation community somewhere has to come together and deliver evaluation insights, in a much sort of shorter period of time than an ideal evaluation would sort of involve. Because unless you are able to provide that kind of thing, some programs, obviously, you can take that long-term, sort of long-term view, and where, all those rigorous evaluation methods would be required. But for most of the programs, governments would like to have quick insights into why sort of, programs, whether the programs are working or whether they are not working, and how those sort of, little tinkering could be done to make them more effective. And that's why we need enough capacity out there. So academic institutions remain one sort of solid, set of bodies where, we need to work much more with them. Some institutions have it, some, but, in a country as large as India, you need a number of institutions, number of academic institutions, and, private sector participants, obviously, to sort of, have that kind of sizable number of people out there who can deliver evaluation as per the demands of the government. So that's what my short comment. All the other aspects I'll be sort of highlighting later on.
Sure, sir. Thank you very much for those pertinent remarks. And at DMU, of course, we benefited tremendously from your expertise in catalyzing partnerships. So we'll definitely come back to you. My next question is for Professor Ian Goldman. There are many challenges when it comes to institutionalizing evaluations in a context which is as complex and diverse as India's. How have some other countries like South Africa been able to overcome these challenges, be it with respect to seeking buy in and ownership for the evaluation process, or capacity building, or making the data systems more robust? Over to you, Professor Goldman.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be with you. So our system started in 2011, and we came to a system. I left in 2018, but with about 75 national evaluations completed, many other provincial and departmental ones, covering about $10 billion of government expenditure. And when we started, we had high-level political commitment. This Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation was established as a strong champion, and my team specifically on evaluation had about 15 staff only. DPME had about 400 staff. And in establishing DPME, there was an effective set of program leaders and managers with delegated authority who were very successful and quite entrepreneurial at getting systems up and running. There was also a flexible project on evidence-based policy making, which helped us to experiment at the beginning. And we also had some capacity, as you clearly do, in departments and public service commission to do evaluations. Next slide. So, I mean, some of the things that worked, that helped us, were learning from other people's experience. And in particular, we learned a lot from Mexico and Colombia. We developed a coalition across government, including with our states, we call them provinces, to support evaluation. So instead of trying to just push it from the center, it became a collaborative enterprise. There was a strong center of government role, who played the role of champion and a knowledge broker and was able to cross-subsidize evaluations. And we built the system incrementally. We didn't just sort of establish everything at one go, starting with the national, then moving to provincial, then moving to departmental evaluations. A key factor was that we had a focus on, we needed to make sure that evaluations were used. We didn't want reports, we wanted action that resulted. It became part of management standards for government, and that was very helpful in pushing for evaluation. The evaluations were made public, and some departments and provinces became centers of excellence. And we do see that evaluations have been used. I mean, Cabinet would typically discuss these national evaluations over about an hour, with ministers taking very considerable interest in them. Next slide. So some of the challenges has been, and I think Alok alluded to this, is the timescales within democracies are, when a new government starts, there's 5 years, but as you get into the process, it may be 1 or 2 years and people want results. So there's tension in government between short-term problem solving versus trying to build a long-term agenda and institutionalization. And linked with that is the cost and the time it takes to do evaluations and related evidence generation like systematic reviews. One of the challenges we had was that this tension played out within the department between its problem-solving role supporting the president and the more longer-term role of supporting the monitoring and the evaluation systems. And we also found that although we were spending a lot of time on these evaluations, there wasn't enough time spent and resource spent on the communication of the results. And this was an area where much more was needed. We also developed a system of improvement plans. And in fact, we only took the evaluations to Cabinet once we had an improvement plan. So we would present Cabinet with the problem, but also the solution. But this process needed more commitment from departments to follow up and to make sure that senior managers had to act on the findings. And one of the key things I think that's important to think about is, in democratic systems, there are leadership transitions. This might be at the political level, but it's also at the level of permanent secretaries or what we call director generals. And changes here, caused some big disruptions in 2017, 2018, which led to a diminution of DPME's role, which is now coming back again. And one of the other things is that, although we were doing this important work with evaluations, there was a massive issue happening, which was state capture that was happening at this phase of government, which was not being addressed through the system. And we were dealing with sort of the smaller issues, but meanwhile, there was a big issue that was not being addressed. Next slide. So some of the key lessons, I think, from the South African experience is this is it's a medium to long-term project to build an evaluation system. It's one thing to have evaluations happening within the system, but to have an overall system takes a long time to get established and get robust and sustainable. You need this driver, which clearly GMEO is, to act as the champion and to play a knowledge broker role. And you need the equivalents in states to play that role as well. It's building ownership is very important. And in fact, one of the problems that happened in 2017 was new leadership came in that tried to tell departments, we're going to do an evaluation of your programs. And this caused a lot of resistance. Whereas the approach we'd taken before was to sort of negotiate with departments that we needed to look at these programs, these very large programs, to evaluate them. And that helped to build ownership, and they participated in the whole evaluation process. You don't have to start with a policy. You can start with just a concept and then start by establishing the system and testing out the way you want it to establish. But it is helpful. I mean, I think we made a mistake in South Africa, but not going for legislation after about 5 years after we started. And this meant it was vulnerable to changes that happened later on. There's also a lot of evaluations that are already happening. And one of the things that you can do is to actually do an evidence map or an evaluation map of all the existing evaluations that already exist before you do any new ones. And this is something South Africa is doing now in the 7 priority areas of government. We're going to be trying to find out all the evaluations which have happened that we can draw on for policy making. The other thing is that we need to work in coalitions with Parliament, with think tanks, with the media, and one of the issues which is sort of raised is, what's the role of citizens in this? Now, in the South African case, we did not involve citizens very much in the system, and I think this was linked to the fact of not doing that much with the media, and I think this is an area we could have done much more. One of the challenges too is monitoring and evaluation get conflated, and actually the skill sets for monitoring and the skill sets for evaluation are very different. And so departments which had evaluation units as opposed to monitoring and evaluation tended to do much better and in establishing the system than those where it was just this conflation of monitoring and evaluation. Another key lesson, I think, is to not only look at the very rigorous, long evaluations that take a long time, but to look at more rapid, formative ones, which can feed back quickly into policy-making approaches. And this aspect there's a huge amount of interest in Africa in this, not just South Africa, but Africa generally, in how we can use rapid evaluation approaches. And lastly, just to finish, I think just to say it's important to have continuous advocacy with politicians and senior management, so you're demonstrating the value of the system. Thanks. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Professor Goldman. The journey of South Africa is indeed very inspiring for us, and there are clearly several lessons to be learned from South Africa as well as other countries like Mexico and Colombia, as you rightly mentioned. I would now like to request Asela ji for his perspectives on how we can ensure that any national evaluation policy framework is responsive to the diverse needs and aspirations of various stakeholders, and more specifically would request your views on how we can enhance the ownership and engagement of legislators in evaluations. Over to you, Asela ji.
Thank you, Urvashi, and good afternoon to everyone who attend this interesting panel. And I must also thank DMEO and NITI Aayog for organizing this conference second time. And last year also I attended a very successful conference. At the same time, inviting me for this panel together with Professor Ian Goldman, Alok ji, and Sanjay ji. With this note, regarding the question, I think this is very important aspect when we talk about disparities, especially addressing marginalized communities and women's needs. Whether we have enough evidence, data produced through evaluations, and whether we use them, even if it is available, whether we use this evidence for decision making. So, especially decision makers should use this information to take their decisions, and also allocate resources, especially for marginalized communities, based on evidence produced through evaluations. And in the context of National Evaluation Policy Framework, we have to see that whether we have the relevant evaluation capacity to produce evaluations which are addressing disparities, which are definitely bringing information about disparities in the country. And disparity can be the race, because of the race, the economical status, the ethnic issues, the language, the geography, and we know that especially in South Asia, in our countries, there are many groups who are disadvantaged or marginalized communities due to different reasons. And if you take a student in the city has more opportunities or advantages than a student, child in rural areas. So how do we actually identify these pockets, disadvantaged communities, and prioritize their needs? And in that sense, so evaluation capacity of evaluators and also institutions to produce evaluations in this respect. And evaluation methodology, the data collection methods, and how to analyze this, whether the evaluators have the capacity and also they have the technical knowledge with evaluation data collection methods and all. And resources. Now, when we talk about disparities, definitely we need to disaggregate data and see where are the issues. So disaggregate data, we may need more resources. And whether we have enough resources allocated for evaluations in the National Evaluation Framework and also National Evaluation Plans. And then when it comes to National Evaluation Framework, whether the decision makers have awareness and whether they see the value of use of evaluations to take decisions based on evaluation reports. So these are very important. I think we have to see whether the National Evaluation Policy Framework address this, whether it's adequately include necessary measures to address the capacity, methodology, and competencies of evaluators, and to use the resources within the National Evaluation Policy Framework, as well as evaluation plans. And I must say, I agree with Ian about citizens. He mentioned as one of the challenges they had. This is also one aspect I think we have to address, because whether citizens are aware of evaluations and whether they demand, whether they participate in evaluations, and whether they use evaluations for different aspects is also important. When citizens are aware of evaluations, it is easier for us to incorporate evaluations and use evaluations. And also, if there is demand from citizens, definitely decision makers, especially politicians, tend to use them. Regarding the second part, you asked me about legislators, the ownership and engagement of legislators. Many countries, many evaluators, many evaluation specialists or communities mention that it is very difficult to work with politicians, or they don't understand evaluation, or they don't know the value of evaluations. My experience is a little different actually, because my experience is that if we engage them and if we somehow uh, help them to understand the value of evaluation and how to use evaluation findings and recommendations in the parliament debates, or when they are taking decisions within the parliament to approve a budget or approve a policy, then definitely they are tend to use this and also support promotion of evaluation. So this is what we have seen in many occasions. And even some of the parliamentarians have taken the lead in supporting for national evaluation policy. I take the example of Nepal. Nepal, when they were working on the new constitution in 2015, there was one parliamentarian who was also part of the Nepal Constitutional Development Committee, and he was instrumental in inclusion of monitoring and evaluation in the Nepal National Constitution. Nepal has very comprehensive aspects, very comprehensive provisions on monitoring and evaluation. That happened in 2015. And 2016, Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, we had a parliamentarian, member of the Global Parliamentarians Forum for Evaluation. He took lead in inclusion of evaluation in their constitution in 2016. And also from my own country, our parliamentarians demanded that they somehow need the national evaluation policy within a short period, because actually we started with the draft in 2003, and our national evaluation policy was approved in 2018. Our parliamentarians started demanding it in 2000 from 2016, that they really need it approved by the government. So these are some of the examples. If they really see the value, and if we make champions, again, like Ian's wording about the champions, we need champions. So that is what had happened to South Africa. They had the champions, and because of that, they have this wonderful system. So in our countries also, we have to see who are the champions, who are interested within the parliament and outside the parliament, within the government, who are interested in this, who can take this forward, and we have to help them as the evaluation community to become champions. And also, some of the parliaments have evaluation units within the parliament. Example is Uganda. They have evaluation unit within the parliament. They produce evaluations and submit it to the cabinet or the parliament for use. And I would mention mainly three things: institutionalize, second, institutionalize, third, institutionalize. That's what I would say. So my key message is we have to institutionalize evaluation. So that's what we believe. And institutionalize evaluation within the parliament, institutionalize evaluation within the government, and institutionalize evaluation within the social system. Citizens or civil society should believe evaluation, and they should see the value. Parliament should believe evaluation, and they should use even in parliament debates, and when they raise hand for the national budget every year, they should use evidence before taking a decision for budget approval. And within the government also, the decision makers, policy makers should see the value, and they should lead this. And all the ministries, department should have evaluation units, and also competent evaluators, maybe as evaluation managers or evaluators within the system. And they should have, of course, evaluation plans, annual evaluation plans, of course, like South Africa, and implemented. So if evaluation is institutionalized within these sectors, it is easier for us to also advocate and help decision makers to use evaluation. So with that note, let me finish. So I have taken almost 10 minutes. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asela ji, for your very insightful views. And as you rightly said, stakeholder ownership, engagement is so critical for the success and institutionalization of any national evaluation policy framework. So we'll definitely come back to you with follow-up questions. My final question in this opening round is for Dr. Sanjay Kumar. While there are undoubtedly many challenges, what do you think are some of the key opportunities that India should build on as we embark on this journey of institutionalizing evaluations in the country? As Professor Goldman also mentioned, it is important to perhaps start incrementally. So maybe there are some tangible small steps that we could take in the Indian context towards achieving this highly ambitious and at times seemingly daunting objective. Over to you, Dr. Kumar.
Okay, thank you for the question. And on behalf of ECOI, we really congratulate you, firstly, to have this second series of a very important event, which it is one of the step towards institutionalizing evaluation culture in a country. So thanks for that. Yes, I could, hear our panelists. So there are very tangible but small steps I think we should, consider now. Time is now. But I think before coming to a few concrete key opportunity which is already there and how do we further build on that, I would like to underscore a few things. Firstly is we talk about evaluation and all, and I think people also, try to understand what is evaluation, why evaluations. But I think it's also a kind of, we should communicate very clearly that evaluation means, it's just to understand the effectiveness of the program. It is not a fault finding or something, but it is to actually improve the program. Whether the evaluation will tell us whether whatever we are doing, whether we are reaching to the most marginalized or not, or to the intended beneficiaries. And also actually it comes with some accountability, be it by a donor, be it by a civil society organization or by the government. Where is the value of money? And this is evaluation which talks about that. Yes, are we in the right direction? Are we utilizing the way we should be doing our programming? And I think lastly, it is also important given the ecosystem of sustainable development with the agenda that we should be reaching we should leave no one behind. So this is evaluation where it will help us to understand where the country is moving to reach many goals. So with this small background, and I think everyone will agree to it, and what I see is that there are certain few concrete steps, though it's a small step, but we can think of initiating or thinking. And I say that it's not that nobody's thinking about it, right? But I think the time is here that we should actually try to do some more rigorous effort. I would firstly start suggesting that at least we should have institutional framework and particularly a policy. A good example, Asela ji talked about Sri Lanka. It took some time. We know even in our country, it is going to take some time, even if we do some effort to have an evaluation policy or evaluation plan, whatever we talk about it, and getting it approved as institutional framework. That is going to take some time, but I think we should start working on that, and it gives a backup support, and then it gives a mandate by the government and institutionalize the whole process within different department ministries at different levels. Some of the key things which I also see, first of all, is as that the DMEO in Niti Aayog is the nodal agency for steering this, and it's a very welcome step, and a lot has been happening. And particularly, I was seeing that your outcome monitoring framework with a very detailed plan. You come out with 67 ministries, outputs, and outcome mapping indicators. So things are already there. But my view is that probably we will build on that, and let's go a little bit beyond, because I see the plans there, but in the public domain, I don't see that there are certain achievements and reviews of that. So probably if that can be firstly institutionalized, even the review of your valuable document and and your outcome framework, if you institutionalize the review mechanism, ministry by ministry, or whatever the modality which you think, so that will also go a long way in institutionalizing the evaluation and the review of the program. And I think Alok ji mentioned in the beginning very clearly that there has to be some demand. So probably the opportunity here is to sensitize various senior government officials from different ministries and departments, and it will lead to creation of demand of evaluation. They can also understand, yes, there is a need, and then they can think of, okay, how do we do that? How neatly and in a participatory manner it could happen. Coming towards the supply side, strengthening for evaluation and institutionalizing, I think I just mentioned that there has to be some kind of organized efforts in terms of proper planning, and you do have a plan for evaluation. Though there is no policy yet, that policy will take some time to come. But even if DMEO, if you can just come up with a kind of a plan that, okay, in a year, 5 evaluations or 4, depending upon the capacity, depending upon the importance, let's have a plan from the very beginning. That will drive the thing that, yes, by end of the year, you should be able to try to understand what is happening. So this will further take into a kind of few steps towards institutionalization. And I think for doing all these things, it's very important that we should have resources. So probably if a dedicated resources, and I'm sure you must be having in your department, but a dedicated resources, either ministry-wise, you can say that if you have this much of the flagship program, at least this much money should be devoted in 5 years or in 3 years, where we can use this for evaluation. So these are some of the steps, and few things also important when we start doing some rigorous evaluation, which we have already seen that you have already undertaken a lot of evaluations. But maybe I would suggest that we should try to see that at least 2 DAC criteria in each evaluation we should be using. One is the effectiveness, and one is the efficiency. These 2 are very vital one, and if we can address those in the evaluations, we should do. But at the same time, we should keep in mind that evaluation studies could be a very long study. It can take years together to do rigorous evaluation. But I think there are methodologies, there are new technologies. So let us try to build upon with consultation. How can we do it a quick and rapid assessments or evaluation, which will actually serve the purpose, and it won't take much resources and time. And my last point at this moment would be is to just to start having some rigorous evaluation, and slowly when we go into a path from for 1 year or 2 years from today, we should also start focusing on some of the things like gender responsive evaluation. We can also think about equity focused evaluation. So means whether we give more importance whether the equity things are being addressed by the programs or not. What is happening to the gender aspects of that particular program, be it agriculture, be it climate change, or be it health, whatever it is. So I think these are some of the steps, and I feel that in DMEO you have a kind of a sky is limit. So you just plan it, give more emphasis, little bit organized, and we are out there. Experts are there. Have expert panel to get the advice and work on that, and we will be happy to to work together, and also support that there should be some practitioners and coming together and advising on the methodologies so that we can take it forward. So I stop here at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar, for sharing your views, and you've given us plenty of food for thought. Also, an especially important point you made at the outset on how we position evaluations, not as a fault-finding exercise, but really an opportunity to understand our current status and the progress we've made towards achieving our goals. And also, thank you for highlighting the opportunities for DMEO to build on the output outcome monitoring framework and our other initiatives. So I'll now move on to the next section of this panel. I have a specific follow-up question for each of our panelists. I would request the panelists to limit their responses to 5 minutes, please, so we can take some questions from the audience towards the end. We already have some interesting questions that have started coming in. So in this round, I'll begin again with Mr. Alok Misra. Sir, I wanted to request your views on the roles and expectations from a national evaluation framework to strengthen the practice of evaluations in India. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rishi. So national evaluation framework not only sets expectations and also responsibilities of what each organization is supposed to do, and sort of that goes a long way in institutionalizing evaluation, because each agency knows that what it ought to do. Now, why we are talking about its importance? Because demand for evaluation is a serious problem. Supply somehow can be ensured. There's enough in the outside ecosystem which can be energized, activated to create that kind of supply. And there I would slightly like to go slightly deeper into this demand issue. And why? Because that, despite our best sort of intentions, that remains quite a big problem in most of the developing country. We could think of demand in two ways: that why it is low, because unless you diagnose the problem, you don't know that why it's happening. So one thing could be that, okay, fine, bureaucracies, typical Weberian bureaucracies are risk averse. They don't like evaluation, right? Because see, the bureaucracies use public money, and that's why they have many agencies sitting over them, right? From a vigilance perspective, from a accountability perspective, or from an audit perspective. So they don't want another agency coming out there and doing some kind of fault finding. And then one could think of everybody pointed out that rather than it being a fault finding sort of exercise, it could be a learning kind of attitude that we could talk about. The second part, and that's where the sort of national framework needs to play that role in terms of creating that virtuous cycle of demand and supply. And that's where that's where I'm trying to sort of emphasize it. The second part would be that bureaucracies don't understand what is evaluation, and that could be true. Most of us don't believe it, but that could be true given our experiences with bureaucracies, that most of them don't understand. And when you don't understand something, you fear it most. So what do we do? Now, that's where the role of capacity building comes. And, enough has been emphasized about capacity building. I'll not sort of dwell, much sort of, much more in it. But what I would like to emphasize that most of the capacity building remains confined to the top echelons, right? And no change happens with, one person sitting there at the top and, just moving, waving a magic wand and things start changing. All the theory of multi-agent leadership shows that you need to have a group of people at different level driving that kind of change. And that's where we start, and that's where I keep on emphasizing that you need not just focus on these big institutions, bureaucracy, training institution. You need to go down to sort of those training institutions at the state level, because that's where things start emerging. I would be more specific here that one should be looking at institution-wise, ministry-wise, department-wise, creating those capacity, because all these different levels need to act in cohesion. Because if you train them separately, they don't actually sort of work together. So all the financial advisors, economic divisions, statistics division, joint secretaries of the divisions which are sort of handling or implementing schemes, all of them need to come together so as to remove those apprehensions or enhance that understanding which is there. The evaluation framework will also talk about some kind of all the competency frameworks are different, but from a supply side perspective, competency framework somewhere standardizes things. And once you standardize things, you can create a course curriculum around it. You can work with university or the higher education regulators to create all those short-term and long-term courses. And that's where people, know that what to do and what makes you a good evaluator. That's where they start, so that, once you standardize these things, the evaluators gain the respect and the confidence, confidence of the government, in terms of the whatever evaluation is being carried out. That's going to be a very professional sort of exercise. Otherwise, the evaluation happens within extended institutions of the government, which fast loses its credibility. The evaluation framework also could look at aligning incentives, and it has been highlighted a lot. I mean, unless we can align it to incentives or bureaucracies, less so because they are receivers, but more so of the politicians because they have to come back to power, and that would be quite so evaluation framework have to look into those nuances of how those communication strategies are created to Ian pointed out to sort of communicate the value of those evaluations. And the evaluation framework also could probably not look at it because evaluation framework will not have, we need to be strategic. In a country like India or in all the developing countries, state is, tasked with number of responsibilities, and COVID has enhanced only that role of state. And that's where we need to be more strategic, go to create champions out there, champions in states and ministries, go to ministries which have large spending departments, or look at even state through a lens of their readiness to sort of accept, that institutionalization reforms and the process reforms, which actually ensure that, that evaluation insights lead to tweaking in policy and program. So broadly, this is the perspective which the evaluation frameworks need to bring and create both, talk about, that's what I emphasized right in the beginning, that look at supply, demand, institutionalization, aligning, and aligning incentives. So all these four perspectives, national evaluation frameworks have to sort of bring together.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for very nicely summarizing a very complex question that we posed to you. My next question is for Professor Goldman, and I've actually picked up a part of this from the audience questions as well. So there is a question that a lot of the speakers in this conference, and I think on this panel as well, agree that evaluations are necessary, but there are differing perspectives on what evaluation constitutes, audits, monitoring, experimentation, etc. So in this wide spectrum of awareness and expectations, how can evaluation create a space for itself and present a clear use case which connects with its users? Professor Goldman.
So is it possible for me to show my slide 3? Because this I use.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, because
yes, we just put it up.
So one of the things that we did, I mean, it was interesting, Alok talking about capacity building at different levels, because I think so that slide, yeah, we could just show that slide. One of my key roles as head of the evaluation system was actually to, if you like, be the advocate, but also very much to build the belief in directors general and permanent secretaries that we were not there to undermine them. We were there to help them perform better, and that they would therefore get the benefit of it, and so would the politicians. And I think this point that you were making about incentives is really critical. You've got to show that if evaluations help you to do better, you will do better. The government will do better. There'll be more impact on citizens, and politicians should reap the benefit. And so that's this thing about aligning incentives. Now, this is a slide we use in a training that we've done. We've trained the top 3 levels of the public service in why evidence is important, in evidence-based policy making and implementation. So while I think all too often training doesn't happen at that very top level. And so this training, I call it training, it's actually more advocacy, but it's about them understanding why evidence can help them to do better. So we ran a 2.5-day training with the top university in South Africa at a lovely venue, which would help to incentivize them to see why this was important. We didn't use the word monitoring and evaluation, we called it evidence. And this chart shows the first 10 evaluation programs that we evaluated, and you can see that most of them required major changes. And I would explore with them, well, if most of the programs require major changes, why is that? And this comes back to work around diagnosis, etc. Now, what would happen if you hadn't evaluated those programs? They would continue as always. So we would be wasting money, and we would not be having the impact. So this is part of building the business case, if you like, as to why you can't afford not to do evaluations. And in that process, you can distinguish what's the difference. Evaluations allow you to judge whether things are working. It's a systematic research process, and also it should always give you a way forward to strengthen and improve. So that's the way it's differentiating from audit. And of course, people's big fear is about audit. They think that it's going to be move into a punitive role like audit, and you have to show them why this is different from audit. And in fact, when we evaluated our national evaluation system in 2017, and in a slide that I haven't shown, we used 3 sample evaluations, and we found the rate of return was between 1 to 7 and 1 to 13. So in other words, if you invested $1 million rupees in whatever the figure is, $100,000 in your evaluation, your return was somewhere between 700,000 and 1.3 million. So this is what was part of the argument of saying you can't afford not to be doing it, because your evaluations are picking up where your programs are not working properly and they need to be improved.
Thank you very much. My next question is for Asela ji. Asela ji, my question is, how can we transition from an all-purpose to a carefully tailored evaluation framework which addresses the evidence needs of the center and the states?
Thank you, Roshi, again for this question. For me, the key word in this question is evidence needs, because I tend to think, who decides evidence needs, and how do they decide evidence needs, and whether they have, what is the context for that. And also I like that, it's between the center and states, India being a vast country and with a lot of diversity. I think I'm really happy that DMEO is thinking about this, as a priority. So that's great, because now when we think about evidence, data collection, evidence from evaluations, and at the end, what is the result? Professor Goldman also mentioned about use of this evidence. I give you one example from my country. I have seen, I'm not criticizing anything, but at the same time, these are lessons learned. I have seen sometimes the center sends a message to the districts or the provinces, within next 24 hours or 48 hours, we need this data information at the ministry, whatever the ministry, right? So everyone works around the clock to get this data to the center. And after that, they take a breath and then go to the next activity. And what happens to this data, and who is using this, and what is the result of this data or any evidence or information they share, I don't think they're aware of this. So that's why I said that, I really like this, the way you put the question. So the states or the subnational level should be able to decide their evidence needs and how they collect them and whether they have the resources. At the same time, who is going to use for what purpose? And at the same time, your challenge might be that when it comes to the central level, so you have several states, and when it comes to the central level, how the central level can take decisions based on different data from the different states. That also definitely you need to figure out. But at the same time, the states should be able to use them at their level first. That's what I mean. And they should see that this is how the data or the evidence is going to be used. And the other thing is that whether we always need to collect data or whether always we need to produce evidence. Because I give you one example now, Parliament of Sri Lanka and University Grants Commission in Sri Lanka signed an MOU to share evidence from the academic sector. The reason is that Parliament definitely needs evidence. At the same time, they realize that there are enough evidence or evaluation reports or research findings are produced by the academic sector. And why should you produce research reports or evaluation reports where already there are reports available in the academic sector, maybe for PhD, maybe for master thesis, or the universities themselves conduct evaluations and research for different other purposes. But they are in shells, and at the same time, Parliament and the government are having big discussions about how to get evaluation or evidence. The other thing is we have the Parliament Research Unit, and Parliament Research Unit, especially it says Research Unit, but now the Parliament has a new proposal to make it Research and Evaluation Unit. Professor Goldman also made some effort some time back. Now, good news, Professor Goldman. So there is a formal proposal to make it. And the idea is that Parliament Research Unit produce brief reports for the parliamentarians, because we expect that our 200-page evaluation report is read by parliamentarians because they don't have any other thing to read or any other work. So they read our reports, 200 or 300-page report, and use these reports or findings and recommendations for their decisions. But it doesn't happen in the real world. And it says normally parliamentarians have less than 10 minutes for reading per day. So definitely, as evaluation professionals, evaluation community, and WOPES, and of course the government departments, relevant government departments, should facilitate use of evaluation for decision makers. So in this sense, so we have a different role as well, not only to produce evaluations. Of course, it should be credible, independent, and user-friendly evaluations, but at the same time, we have to have, of course, South Africa is the best example. Again, they have this 25-5-1 policy. So for decision makers, they have very brief findings and recommendations for use. This is a good example for all of us. So how do we do that in our countries is something we have to think. And then, so we definitely need to balance this with the subnational level. We have to facilitate their evaluation plans, as well as how to accommodate them with the central level evaluation plans. How do we, incorporate that? And also how to provide tools for them to identify their evidence needs, and how to provide tools for them to decide and collect the evidence or data, and how to provide tools for them to use evaluations is our, I think, role and challenge. We should, have proactive role on that. So I took 1.5 minutes more this time. Sorry about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Asila ji. So my next question is for Dr. Sanjay Kumar, and this is also a question that's coming up from some of the audience members, that how can we align the evaluation framework with existing statistical and monitoring systems, as well as new and emerging analytical technologies?
Okay, I think, Urvashi, this is a very pertinent question. You know, what happens is when we talk about evaluation, so everyone thinks, or most of the people think, oh, evaluation, so it means we have to collect the data, go to the field, primary data, time, resources, and all. But I think just take a minute and back to that there are different methodologies available. And at the same time, we have a national statistical system in terms of large scale survey data available with us from NSSO. If you talk about health and even allied side, even National Family Health Survey, there are many. One good point also is that this data is not just available in report forms, But the unit level data has been, provided for the researcher evaluators, and we have got access to analyze those data and do the way we want research or evaluation. So I think there is a need for aligning, using rigorous impact evaluation, statistical models and tools, applying it on the already existing data from a big national survey. Let me take one example. Recently, with the NFHS 5 data, I tried to do some evaluation of Mission Parivar Vikas because it was in selected districts. And this data of the 2 rounds gave me a perfect situation for a case control pre and post design and use difference in difference methodology. And the results is fantastic. And one can see that what is happening, what is not happening. Similarly, one can think of evaluating certain programs like aspirational districts using secondary data, triangulating it, going to the field and collecting some primary data and triangulate. So I think this is very, very pertinent thing that we should align on that. You also asked for about the technology and other things, the newer technology. I think, yes, with the advent of new technology, even in data collection, one can use a very kind of, very rapid techniques, and it's a real-time data collections from the beneficiaries, getting their, satisfaction level, the client's exit interviews. It depends on which program you want to evaluate. So there are possibility. And I would also like to add one more point is that many a times, the role of big data is also very important. And what do I mean by big data here? Is that, for example, if we want to see women's access to the banking services and their transaction habits kind of a thing, we need not to go to the field to collect the data, but from the government, if you request, the banking sector or the RBI, they have got these transactions detailed, or you select few banks and you try to obtain those big data and analyze. You can see a lot what is happening in a short period of time with a more valuable insight of getting into and evaluating. So I think it is important, and we should think of some alternative and newer ways of aligning our evaluations with these systems. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'll just maybe take a couple of additional questions from the audience, essentially on dimensions that we might not have touched upon as much, and then we'll request all the panelists for their closing remarks. So there is a question for Professor Goldman, which says that financing of evaluations has a direct implication on the quality of work that is undertaken. Quick evaluation assessment studies are marked with very small budgets that do not allow such scope to collect useful quantitative data. What steps can be taken to streamline finance mechanisms for evaluations, and are there any examples of the same?
So, yes, you can't, obviously, if you're doing a rapid evaluation, you can't do big data collection. Although, picking up on the point that Sanjay made, our quickest and cheapest evaluation was one where there was existing data. So we were able to take data on learning outcomes of children and link it with a data set on who had registered for the reception year of schooling, and we could look at the impact of the reception year of schooling in different provinces, etc. So if the data's there, you can do it rapidly and you can do it quickly and cheaply. If it's not, then you can't do it in a rapid evaluation, and you need to look at a rapid evaluation as an opportunity to do a more formative assessment, probably around implementation, not around impact. So if you need rapid feedback, which you want to use to incorporate in the management process, a rapid evaluation can be very helpful. But that doesn't exclude the need. So I mean, one of the challenges I have at the moment is everybody wants to rush down the rapid evaluation route because it's cheaper and quicker. But I'm saying it's only relevant in certain situations. So if it's a very contested terrain, if you need to be exactly right in your answer, these are not situations when it's good to do a rapid evaluation. You need a really robust one. Otherwise, it's going to get caught up in political debates, etc., that you won't have the strength of methodology to address. There's a lot of work happening in that. I mean, I'm doing training tomorrow on rapid evaluation, for example. It's really a hot topic in Africa at the moment.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. We also have a question for Mr. Alok Misra, and this is from Dr. Seema Singh, and she asks, is there any common pathway of MNE by converging with all the government and non-government stakeholders, including academicians, to measure the developments at the grassroots level?
Okay, now that's a fairly difficult question because see, we are sort of here in India we are starting at the level of the center. Slowly, I think we'll be going down to the states, and before we start percolating down to the Panchayati Raj institutions. Now, bringing everything together will require a lot of coordinating action, expecting the center would be able to, federal governments would be able to do. Now, obviously not. That will require states to take that kind of leadership, states to develop that kind of evaluation culture, where the district and the Panchayati Raj institutions also sort of are able to sort of have simple techniques. I mean, a lot of social audits are done, right? That is also one form of evaluation only. No one could sort of see it. I mean, from that perspective, and certain schemes like Manrega have institutionalized social audits. That looks to me like one kind of pathway that that one could follow, but that would require sort of evaluation being part of the of the program. It's sort of embedded in the program. And then sort of rest of the agencies, especially the implementing agencies, because I mean, when you see it from an implementing agency's perspective, they are so obsessed with implementation only that that's what for them is those blinkered kind of eyes that they have. They see it from only that perspective. Implementing is my task, and not looking into rest of the things. So I think Manrega does sort of offers us one template. Long term, what I think is that over a period of time, a lot of non-government organizations, a lot of academic institutions working at the state level, they are more embedded in that development ecosystem, and they will have to be leveraged. My understanding is that Karnataka has been able to do this to a great extent, and it does sort of offer us some hope that the same kind of sort of thing can be sort of replicated, at least in some of the states which are more amenable, which are more prepared for these kind of interventions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking up a rather difficult question. So now we're almost reaching the end. So I'll just request each of our panelists to please share some very brief closing remarks in just about a minute or so. A single headline, idea, or message that you would want the audience to take away from this session. So we'll start this time with Asela ji.
Thank you, Urvashi. And I want to very quickly mention one thing, that the national evaluation policy I mentioned in Sri Lanka. So when we started in 2003, that is not the version we have now, the approved version, and much different version. And I must say, from my point of view, negative. Negative in the sense, the essential items we wanted are not there. But at least we are happy that we have the national evaluation policy in the country. I was also instrumental in inclusion of equity and gender response evaluation in the national evaluation policy in 2015. But we see that the last version, approved version, does not have that. So my point is that this journey is not easy. We have to convince everyone, and there are many stakeholders, and we have to go together with them. And some steps we lose things, some steps we gain things. At the same time, we have to continue this journey, although it is difficult, and convincing others and non-evaluation community is a challenge for us, but we should not give up. At the same time, we have to see what we can do with our capabilities, our skills, at the same time, how to get others together in this journey. So I congratulate NITI Aayog and DME also that developing National Evaluation Policy Framework, and looking forward to see that endorsed very soon and learn from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Dr. Kumar, let me come to you next. Your closing remarks, please.
Okay, thank you. I think for me, the closing remarks and big ticket item would be is that there are various players in the field of evaluations, be it from the government, non-governmental practitioners and experts. I think my message would be that let's work together to inculcate a culture of evaluation, particularly seeing in Indian context. We should work for that, and not only at the national level, but also down to the state level. And we try to do those, positive things surrounding evaluations. So probably it will lead the way for further institutionalizing, which we are talking about. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Alok sir, we'll come to you next.
Okay, what I think is that institutionalization of evaluation is key to correcting some of that ad hocism that has crept into policymaking, and which is more evident in developing country context. And in today's context of complex policies, you do require that iterative 360-degree policy cycle to start yielding results. And if evaluation becomes key component of that 360-degree policy cycle, this policy cycle of finding the right kind of intervention will not be an endless exercise, which we have right now, tend to do it. The second part is that institutional, which sort of, Dr. Sanjay also sort of talked about. That institutionalization requires multiple interventions on supply side, on the demand side, on the institution building side, on national policy framework, and all of these parts have to come together. They have to add to each other, so that ecosystem of different parts interacting with each other coherently and reinforcing each other sort of emerges. And that's where all the DMO has a big role in terms of bringing all these parts together, so that that ecosystem becomes stronger and stronger.
Thank you very much, Alok sir. Professor Goldman, last but definitely not the least, your final message for us today.
I think building on what Alok said, I think evaluation has an important role to play, but it must be mainstreamed in the public management process. It can't be an orphan stuck out somewhere. And a key way in doing that is to ensure that evidence is required in systems, in doing budgets, in doing plans, so that that institutionalizes the demand. That second point I'd just like to make is we must emphasize the learning aspect and how you can use evaluations to improve performance and eventually impact, and so that the political benefits. And just a piece of advice, seeing the problems that South Africa's had since 2017, you must look to build a strong coalition to support the system across the state with the legislatures and with the public, because you don't want change in one champion to limit the sustainability of the system. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Thank you. There's so much more to discuss, but we now need to conclude this session, which I believe has provided several rich insights and direction for further deliberation and action. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our esteemed panelists for sparing their time and also sharing their valuable perspectives so generously. I would also like to thank all the participants for their active participation and for sending in so many questions and comments. The closing plenary session of the National Conference on Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning will begin at 5 p.m. in just about 15 minutes from now. The link to the session is posted on the Q&A box. We look forward to you joining us for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.